Hey everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from June 28th, 2024, and I'll be posting this, I'm recording this on December 27th, 2024, posting this on the 28th. As always, I give you those dates so you know when this information is actually most relevant because, as we'll see in a moment, the market is always moving and changing. Also, as always, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. This week we got 16 books to look at. We look at those two lists to determine what was making books hot, why were we chasing them, and then what have they done in the market since? Would you have been better off being patient? Would you have been better off going after them? And see if we can learn so we all make better decisions. A quick reminder before we dig into this list, I do have memberships now. I'm using those to try to help support the ability to stay on StreamYard and do some of the stuff that I do. So I'll put the tiers up right now, and at the end you obviously see my current members. So thank you to anybody that has been a member. All right. With that, let's dig into the list and see what we can learn this week. First up, we got Proof number 1 from 2007. This book was optioned for a show by Fox, and that's why I was hitting the list. And it was like hitting the list big time compared to, in terms of big value, compared to most option books anymore. But we were talking 45 all the way to 120 for copies of this book. Big numbers for people were spending on this particular one. Now it's still a $20 to $40 book, which is really good 6 months later for an option book, but nowhere near what it was going for back then in terms of value and that kind of stuff. Obviously, the low end of what it was going for back then is near the high end of what it's going for now, but there were a ton of sales that are now basically a dumpster fire that no reason to have chased this book. Next, we have Negative Burn, number 7, and this is the first appearance of the Proof characters in a short story. It was hitting the list at 20 to 60, and now it's a $2 to $10 book, also a dumpster fire. Again, these books have come crashing down. This is not unusual with option news. People have already forgotten about this. The fact that the first book was still 20 to 40 is very unusual, honestly, and the fact that people were paying as much as they were, it's just almost always a mistake when it comes to option news. Next, we're moving into covers, and first up we have Gromit's number 1, the Brett Parson 1 in 10. I say this is cover. This is also a little bit of buzz with the series. People were really enjoying this series. This particular cover was on the list 3 weeks ago when it first came, 3 weeks previously when it first came out. It was back on the list as number 2 was getting ready to come out. $40 to $100 back then for a raw copy. Now only one recent raw sale of $45, 2 9.8 sales, $125 and $150. So we're going to call this down, and then I'll be back because the one sale is within the range, but it's very much on the low end, and there's several books listed for within the range that aren't selling. So yeah, we're going to call it down, and I'll be back. Not quite a trap or a dumpster fire, but I know this series is about to come to an end. I know a lot of people that have been enjoying it, but yeah, Gromit's number 1, definitely one that was worth being patient on. Next, we have Uncle Scrooge and the Infinity Dime, number 1. Last week we had a J. Scott Campbell 1 in 50, I believe. Now we got a Gabriel Del Otto 1 in 10 hitting the list of Uncle Scrooge. This 1 in 10 was only going 15 to 20, not a great sign. Now it's a $5 to $15 book, 9.8. It's only going to cost you around $60, $65. So down in a trap on this one. Still a kind of a cool Uncle Scrooge cover, but no reason to have chased it in the moment. All right, next we have Detective Comics, number 1086. This is Sebastian Fulmara, 1 in 25, was going 40 to 60. If you've been following on this, that's right at double ratio on an average. 1 in 25 is going for double ratio. We're almost always a trap. That's the case here as well. It's now a $20 to $30 book, aka going for right at around ratio. This is very much our standard pattern on 1 in 25s that get to double. They usually end up being around ratio, so this is a trap, just like we would expect over the years. One thing that paid off that we've learned. So next, we have Blood Hunt, the Red Band edition, number 4. This is the Betsy Cola 1 in 25. These Red Band edition 1 in 25s that were homages to old pre-code horror covers were all going for huge numbers back in the summer. People were going nuts for these after the number 1, and they just kept doing it every time the 125 came out. The number one has done decently, but since then, as we've looked back, these books have not done well. This is probably the worst one. It was 75 to 125 back then. Now it's 10 to 30. The only 9.8 sale recently was $72. Yeah, that's a dumpster fire. There was no reason to have chased these books. They have not held up now that the event is over. People are just not that interested anymore. Next, we have Knight of Khonshu, or Moon Knight, Fist of Khonshu. I'm all over the place here. So yeah, we'll say this one more time. Moon Knight, Fist of Khonshu, number 0. This was a surprise release. People didn't necessarily know was coming. This particular cover where people were jumping on $95 to $150 for this thing when it was first coming out. And boy, is this a big giant dumpster fire. It is now a $10 to $25 book, which is pretty good for a book that just came out, $10 to $25. But yeah, nowhere near the craziness people were going when this book first showed up. All right, with that, we're going to move into a little bit of buzz. Strictly, we got Guer number 1. And this was hitting the list just because there were several new books from Guer launching with new characters, expanding this universe. So people were going back to the original Guer number 1. It was still only doing 10 to 15, 9.8, 60 to 80. This is really hitting the list mostly because a spike in sales, not necessarily a change in value. Now it's still a $5 to $15 book, 9.8, 55. We put this as down, I'll be back, as most sales were under 10, but I mean, you could have argued maybe this was steady and I'll be back. But either way, yeah, not, still, I know this universe has its fans, but this book's pretty affordable if you want to get in. Next, we have X-Men 97, number 1. This hit the list because the third print was releasing and the miniseries finale was coming out the next week, so there was some more, but the cartoon was over, but there was some more buzz for this book, so people were going back and picking up number 1 still. $15 to $25 for raw copies, 9.8, 75 to 100. Now it's a $15 to $30 book for a raw copy, 9.8, 70 to 85. We'll call this steady and I'll be back. Yeah, it's still right in the same range. You do a little better, it looks like, on the 9.8s. Raw copies are basically the same, so yeah, that's where we're at on this one. People love the series, well, love the animated series. I don't know what they necessarily thought about this one, but people are still chasing this first issue of the prequel to the cartoon series. So next, we have Uncanny XMen number 129. This is a big X-Men book. This is the first appearance of Kitty Pryde and Emma Frost, both appearing here. This was hitting the list because there was spec that these two characters were going to be in Season 2 of X-Men 97. And so 75 to 200 back then, 9.8, 15, 60. Realistically, this was another one that wasn't really a little bit of a spike in sales. Wasn't a big jump in value. Still setting right now 60 to 200, 16 to 1680 on the last two, 16 and 1680 on the last two 9.8 sales. So we'll call this steady and worth it. Marginally creeping toward up, but yeah. Raw copies are really right in the same range. 9.8 have crept up just a touch. All right, next we have Uncanny X-Men number 133. This is the first solo Wolverine cover. I'm not sure it's really a thing, but I guess it is. I mean, he'd been in books for a long time before he got a solo cover. But anyway, this was all had everything to do with the lead up to Deadpool and Wolverine. 50 to 200 back then. 9.8, 795. Now it's a $40 to $100 book for raw sales, but there was a raw copy that went for $325. Actually, the most recent raw sale seems like very much an outlier, given that 9.8, the most recent 9.8 only went for $665. But those are the sales. Overall, we're going to call this steady, and I'll be back. Both the raws and 9.8s appear to have taken a very slight step back, but still. An early 1980 X-Men, early Wolverine. Yeah, still a book that people love. Next, and part of Dark Phoenix Saga. So, next, we have Wolverine number 88. First battle between Wolverine and Deadpool. Obviously hitting the list because of the movie. Raw copies, 50 to 100 back then. 9.8, 425. Now it's a $25 to $85 book raw. 9.8, 340 to 350. So we'll go down and I'll be back on this one. Still always going to be a lot of interest in this particular cover in this book, but yeah, starting to cool a little bit now that we've moved away from the movie. Next, we got some DC books to wrap up the list this week. We have Green Lantern number 201, first appearance of Kilowog, and this was hitting the list because we got confirmation that they actually are going to finally make this Green Lantern series they've been talking about, it seems like, for a decade, and that Kilowog probably is going to be part of it. So, yeah, raw copies back then were 35 on average. 9.8 went from 191. Now it's a $10 to $60 book raw. That average is probably about the same at the 35. 9.8, 170. So we're going to call this steady. I'll be back. Book hasn't really moved up anymore. This is kind of just where Kilowog sits. So it'll be interesting. He is one of the Lanterns I like the most. So we'll see how good this series ends up being. So next we have Superman number 75, The Death of Superman, Death of Doomsday. And this is spec that Doomsday was going to come to the Superman and Lois show, which I believe he did. Raw copies back then were going for 15, 9.8, 135. Now it's a $5 to $15 buck, 9.8, 120, all the way to 250. Some weird stuff going on with 9.8s on this one. Like, and it wasn't just like newsstands were like 225, 250. I was like, okay, and regular directs were, 120, 140, whatever. But there was then a direct that was over 200. There was a newsstand that was under 200. It's a little bit all over the place on 9.8 on this particular one. We'll call it steady and worth it. I don't know that it's really went up any. But yeah, a classic 90s book. I don't think it's ever going to be the value that people were hoping when they bought millions of copies of it. But yeah, it's still got a decent value on a 9.8. Raw copies are, dime a dozen. Next, Superman number 32 from 2014. First appearance of Mr. Oz. First appearance of Ulysses. And I believe Ulysses is really the character here. Maybe it's Mr. Oz, but people are speculating one of the villains in the movie, the new Superman movie, was going to be Ulysses. $2 to $12 back then, 9.8, 40. So it wasn't doing much, just a bunch of sales. Now it's still a $2 to $15 book. So steady and I'll be back. No reason to have chased it at the time. Next, our last book this week is All-Star Superman number 1. This is hitting the list again because people were still specking this might be, because James Gunn talked about how much he loved this story, that people were still specking it might be some inspiration for the movie. Although it's really like if you've read it, no spec, it's like more of a Superman at his end than it is Superman at his beginning. So I can't imagine they're really going to tell the story. But anyway, $8 back then on average, 9.8 to 140. Now it's a $5 to $20 book, 9.8, 100 to 250. Again, the 250 here was a bit of an outlier, but they're running a ton of sales. So we're going to call this steady and worth it, with most of the sales being closer to the values back then. So that is this week's list. I want to thank you guys for watching. A reminder that you can become a member of my channel, in which case you'll get this video as soon as I upload it, as opposed to having to wait Saturday. So with that, like I said, thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you next time. Later.